Okay, everyone. Everyone, good afternoon. My name is Stephen Kelly. I'm Chief Executive of Manufacturing Northern Ireland. You're all very welcome along this afternoon. This is a session on the removal of the rebate on red diesel, and I will take you through some slides that we've taken from HMRC's guidance. And there's an opportunity for you to ask some questions and answers. So if you could use the Q&A function. So at the bottom of your screen, there should be a Q&A function. And that's an opportunity to log your questions. So please put them there. We'll take a copy of them and make sure that you get an answer to the question that you've raised. Next slide, please, Connor. We'd hope to be joined today by Steve Clark, who is in the fuel duty side of HMRC's Excise and Environmental Taxes Policy Delivery Group. Sadly, just as before we went live with this seminar, we've got word that Steve has taken on well and is not able to join us. So that means we're not going to have any direct answers from HMRC during the session, but rather than cancel and postponing to a later date, given the timescales involved, we thought we would take you through what the policy is and for you to log those Q&A questions when you have them. I'm also really pleased to be joined by a good friend of Manufacturing NI and my own personally, which is Gordon Best, who's the Regional Director of the Mineral Products Association for Northern Ireland. Gordon and the wider construction sector have really been working hard as a lobby with the industry, but also with HMRC and with Treasury on this particular issue. So if there's any questions as we go through that Gordon may be able to answer, we'll take the opportunity to ask Gordon to contribute. But there's also other activity which Gordon will talk about taking place tomorrow in Westminster and elsewhere. So it's important that Gordon gives us all an update. We'll share this presentation after the event, so you don't need to take notes or copies. We'll share a recording plus the slides as well. And as I said, Steve's not able to join us, but we've got a commitment from his colleagues that they'll come and answer whatever questions are raised as part of this session. So please do use the Q&A function. Next slide, please, Connor. So as many may know, are becoming increasingly aware of, at least from the 1st of April 2022, the rebated diesel, which is commonly known as red diesel, and rebated biofuels will no longer be able to be used as they are currently. Essentially, the discount has been applied in terms of the tariff and levies on that diesel has been removed, and that's going to have a very significant cash impact on anybody who uses that fuel, either by choice, but more increasingly and more likely by necessity. Next, please, Connor. What HMRC and Treasury have said is that rebated biofuels are restricted to the following qualifying purposes, essentially for use in vehicles and machinery in agriculture, horticulture, and a variety of other narrow sectors, including the cutting of verges and hedges, and vehicles designed to run on rail tracks. So there's very little scope here in terms of the wider manufacturing community, in terms of their use of these products. And particularly, this is going to have a particular impact on people who use it in terms of the machinery, etc., etc. Next slide, please. It is allowed for heating and electricity generation, but that's restricted to domestic settings and not in terms of commercial settings. Now, there are some other exemptions in terms of churches, town halls, hospitals, and off-grid generation, but they're very limited. Sports clubs are also included. Next slide, please. So what can you actually use the rebated fuel for, Connor? So you'll only be able, from the 1st of April, you'll only be able to use the rebated fuel for very specific purposes when using certain machines, vehicles, vessels, and appliances. Next slide. You will no longer be able to use that rebated fuel If you're no longer able to use that rebated fuel, you need to either use ordinary diesel or biofuels, which have had the full rate of duty already applied and paid for. Next slide. Essentially, the rebated fuels that are affected by these changes, so the products that you may be using currently, all those that are removed, the rebate is currently rebated diesels. HVOs, which are rebated hydro-treated vegetable oils, and I know there's some people that are using some of those. Rebated biodiesels and bioblends, if you have a mix there. Kerosenes that are taxed at the rebated diesel rate, and then any fuel substitutes. Next slide, Connor. Those that are using kerosene for heating, fully rebated kerosene is unaffected by these changes and can be used for all heating purposes. Next slide. There's particular types and formulations, I suppose, of biodiesels and bioblends and fuel substitutes. These are already subject to fuel duties. So when they're set aside, they can be used for any of the following purposes in terms of engines and motors or machinery that you're using within your factory or your quarry. Next slide, please. They will be liable to fuel duty if they're used for heating purposes, though. So whilst you can use them for those specific purposes in terms of machinery and vehicles, if you're using it for heating purposes in terms of your factory or your spaces, then a fuel duty will have to be applied. The rebated rate of fuel duty will apply when they're used in any any commercial heating scenario. So back to the earlier slides where I said that they're only available to be used for domestic purposes only. Next slide, please. So the big challenge is we're sitting today in the middle of January, and these fuels need to be expired by the 1st of April. So HMRC have offered some advice in terms of how you prepare for the 1st of April 2022. Next slide. So you're not permitted to use those rebated fuels in vehicles, vessels, machines, or other appliances from that date on. So HMRC are making it absolutely clear that should any of that fuel be available and be used in your premises, then you will be asked to pay that additional rebate. Next slide, please. But if you're not able to use that rebated fuel, you should plan to run those stocks down, particularly by the 1st of April, as close as you possibly can, if not nil. Next slide. You're only able to use that rebated fuel up until the 1st of April. And if fuel was legally used in your vehicles or machines before the 1st of April, so anything between now and the 1st of April is fine. Anything beyond the 1st of April, you're not legally entitled to use that as a rebated fuel. Next slide. Many will have fuels in stock and in storage. HMRC are making it clear that you should plan to expire those stocks as quickly as you possibly can, and certainly by the 1st of April. You will not, though, be expected to flush out any rebated fuel that's in storage tanks at that point. Next slide. It's probably worth checking what amount of rebated fuel you currently have in stock or in use, and to determine how much you're likely to use between now and the end of March 2022, and how you plan to actually expire that stock that's remaining before that deadline of the 1st of April. Next slide. Obviously, people may order supplies between now and the end of March, 1st of April. So HMRC are asking you to order as much as you calculate that you think that you will use, but not more than that, should that extend beyond the 1st of April. Next slide. If you use diesels or biofuels that have duty paid already, when putting them into your vehicles or machinery, then nothing changes. So if you've already paid for a duty on a fuel that's existing, then you don't need to do anything about that. Next slide. However, if you do have any surplus come the 1st of April 2022, you'll need to plan what you hope to do with that remaining stock. You are able to sell or give it to someone who's allowed to use it. So some of those exemptions that we listed out at the beginning. You can sell it to a registered dealer, and they're very specific dealers regarding these types of fuels. So you need to identify one and see if they're willing to take that stock from you. Or you can dispose or recycle it through a registered disposal company. Next slide. But HMRC are asking that if you do have to expose, or if you do have to sell on or remove or recycle those materials, that you do keep a record of how it was disposed of. But you do not need HMRC approval in advance of doing that. So make sure you keep good records of it, but you do not need to talk to HMRC in advance. Next slide. Now, obviously, a lot of manufacturers may have bought ahead, they may have hedged in terms of fueling, and they may have quite a lot of material still in their businesses. There is a means of dealing with that in terms of large volumes and those reserves, but you need to really contact HMRC as quickly as possible at oils.policymail@hmrc.gov.uk and begin a conversation with them. The deadline for doing that has passed and expired, but they are willing to have a conversation. So if you do have concerns about large volumes of these fuels still in and around your business, then you really need to act as quickly as possible by contacting that email address. Next slide, please. So people will have fuel in vehicles or indeed appliances that are both allowed and non-allowed. HMRC reckon that you flush out those tanks and remove all traces of the rebated fuel whenever you're switching those uses, and use the full duty paid diesel or biofuel instead. So if you have material in vehicles, they're asking for that to be flushed, or if not expired, and to replace that with fuels that have already had the duty paid. Next slide. Many will have backup generation in factories, and I know quite a number of manufacturers rely upon those in terms of safety and maintaining operations should there be problems with the grid. The fuel is allowed in terms of backup generation, but you're only allowed to use rebated fuel for power generation in non-commercial purposes. Now, there was an exemption permitted if you applied before the 10th of June 2021, but again, it's worth contacting that email address that we supplied earlier in terms of having a conversation with HMRC around how you manage that process. Fuel can be used, as I said, but they're only for very specific purposes. So it's a contingency in terms of backup generation or maintaining critical safety and environmental protections. So we don't know your individual business. We don't know your circumstances. You have a better insight than we will ever have of those. So again, do contact HMRC for some guidance directly on that. Next slide, please. You will not be asked to flush out any traces of rebated fuel from fuel tanks if they're relating to your backup generators, critical safety and environmental equipment, or storage tanks used to supply them. So again, if you're worried or concerned about it, the best protocol is that email address that we've supplied. Next slide. Backup generation in many facilities is used as the main source of supply. So there are premises that aren't connected directly to the grid, but there is some exemption there, but only in very limited circumstances. So those are relating to fire protection equipment, medical and life supporting equipment, and auxiliary boilers relating to health and safety and environmental protection. So again, you'll know your own business. If you have any specific worries about the use of those, if you're not connected to the grid and you use backup or on-site generation, then have a conversation with HMRC. Next slide, please. So apologies that, again, that Steve wasn't able to join us because of illness today. As I said, I do have Gordon Best from the Mineral Products Association. I'll just ask Gordon to update us on how we got here today and what's likely to be happening over the coming weeks ahead. Gordon, I'll pass to you and then we'll take the Q&A.
Thanks, Stephen. Hello, everyone. I think you've given a good overview there of the HMRC advice to date. I think it's worthwhile pointing out from the very start that ignore the government spin that this is some type of environmental measure. It's got nothing to do with the environment. It's a cash grab. And certainly we all know that red diesel is simply white diesel with a dye in it. This was due to come in 2020 and obviously following lobbying by a number of sectors. The government agreed, particularly around because of COVID, etc. It was delayed until 2022. Now, our position locally here and with MPA nationally, and indeed with other sectors such as the civil engineering contractors and the construction plant hire association, has always been that this should have been phased out because the technology to drive most construction and quarry plant is just not there at the minute and won't be probably for at least 5 years. Also, the government seemed to be under the impression that by removing this rebate, they're going to somehow incentivize plant manufacturers to increase their speed in terms of achieving the lower carbon, zero carbon fueled vehicles. The UK and Ireland represent about 5% of the market of the large plant manufacturers. I'm talking about the likes of Hitachi, Volvo, Caterpillar, etc. And I don't think those companies are going to be changed in their pace by the removal of the red diesel rebate in the UK. Of course, it also creates a lot of problems, particularly for isolated sites like quarries or sand and gravel pits. And that's the point that we have argued, that it creates a greater risk of theft, hence a greater risk of environmental damage. Also in Northern Ireland specifically, quite a number of operators are around the border. This is going to mean that operators in Northern Ireland and indeed those, for example, road contractors who operate and have contracts in the border counties south of the border, are going to be less competitive as well. It will also introduce cash flow problems because, as you all know, basically we're talking about a product that's now twice the value of red diesel. So we, as an association, have been taking part in 2 Treasury consultations, and then there was 2 HMRC consultations around their guidance. And we, as I said, we've been consistent. We recognise that the rebate would go at some stage. We're all very much committed to the decarbonisation and net zero journey. However, as a point I made earlier, the technology, the machinery is not there yet. So we're calling on government to pause or even phase out the rebate. So I'm being totally honest, at this stage, I don't think government will step back from removing the rebate. We have taken action. For example, a number of months ago, we asked all our members we developed a template letter, and we asked our members to write to their MPs and their local councillors and their local MLAs, which quite a few actually did. As an association, we wrote to all the Northern Ireland MPs, Unfortunately, only one party responded, that was the DUP, and hence Carl Lockhart, the MP for Upper Bann, has secured a Westminster Hall debate, which has taken place on Wednesday at 4:30. I'll maybe I'll send the link through to Stephen, and Stephen Connor can circulate the link that you can tap into that debate on Wednesday afternoon. And a lot of those points that we've already made, Stephen from Manufacturing and I, Gavin McGuire from the Federation of Master Builders, and Mark Spence of the Construction Employers Federation have been working with me on a joint statement that we're putting out on Wednesday morning that'll go to the local press to coincide with this debate. And we just have to keep the pressure on it even at this late stage. And without getting too political, we all know that this Tory government are renowned for doing U-turns. So hopefully we can influence them to recognize the situation. Because remember, 2 years ago, no one could have foreseen the situation we're in at the minute with high energy prices, increasing energy prices for that matter, and also construction material cost inflation. So the message to government is to think again and to pause the removal of this rebate, to give companies time and the technology the time to catch up. That's me, Stephen.
Gordon, can I maybe ask you a question? So it's very good security debate, the Westminster Hall debate tomorrow through Carla Lockhart MP, which is great in terms of elevating this as an issue and getting it closer to the decision makers. But as a wider construction industry and a minerals industry, have you calculated across either in Northern Ireland or in the UK the anticipated additional cost that this will apply to the industry?
Yeah, well, the MPA have done a calculation. They reckon an additional cost of 100 million. We estimate it here in Northern Ireland is somewhere between 20 and 25 million. And remember, and it was one of the points we made to the infrastructure minister, is that government here in Northern Ireland purchased somewhere in between 40 and 50 or 40 and 45% of construction materials manufactured in Northern Ireland. So again, this is money going around. Much of this money is going around in circles again. And in fact, the construction or the Civil Engineering Association in GB have calculated somewhere between 250 million and 480 million additional cost for the construction industry. Because remember, the other complication in all of this, Stephen, is that many construction plant suppliers are supplying not only the construction industry but also the agriculture industry. So if they have an excavator or a loading shovel hired into a farmer one week, and then it's going to the construction industry the following week, they have to flush out that the tank and that machine. It's just doesn't make sense. And why the big question, and it's one of the questions that Carla will ask, why, and it's an answer we've been trying to get out of the HMRC, why are some sectors removed from this and others included? And agriculture, yes, it's an important industry, but we're all important industries.
Gordon, the £25 million hit that the mineral sector anticipates in terms of Northern Ireland's mineral sector, that can be multiplied many times when you include other users of these fuels. I know the mineral sector is trying hard in terms of net zero, pushing hard in terms of alternative fuel sources. But at this point in time, do you have any assessment on the distance in time between now and when those other fuel sources will be economic for operators to be able to use and a ready supply of those fuels? Well,
I've been various webinars over the last 6 to 12 month stages. I'm sure you have as well, and you know, a lot of the main global markets in terms of construction plant are talking, you know, at least 5 years. I know one I was on the University of Galway about 5 or 6 months ago, and Volvo were saying that they don't anticipate going into full production of hydrogen-based plant, heavy plant, until 2026, 27. That's how far it's away. Yes, there are pilot schemes, and I'm sure everybody knows about the JCB investment in zero carbon vehicles. But again, that's going to take a lot of time. And plus, we also have to look at, as a minerals industry, we're keeping our ear close to the ground. That's, you know, in terms of the indigenous fuel supplies of the likes of lithium and other rare earth metals. You know, we're going to, you know, Brexit, COVID has taught us the lessons about the need for local supply. And I know within BAES, there's actually one department has been set up within the last 12 months that specifically look at, and they're doing a lot of work with the British Geological Survey of identifying and locating, you know, indigenous supplies of lithium. A lot of people on the call will be well aware of the Cornish lithium and British lithium, and the work that's exploratory work that's going down on in the southwest of England. You know, but that needs to be multiplied many times if we're to secure the reserves of these metals and minerals that we need to drive forward the decarbonisation and the hydrogen revolution.
So it's safe to say that this tax is coming in at a time when there's no alternative for many users of these materials. I think that's safe to say. And in fact, there's a distance in time between now and then,
yep,
which will cause economic harm on an individual business basis as well as the economy as a whole.
The timing and the manner in which it's been brought in, even recognising that they did delay it 2 years, is all wrong.
As I said to anybody watching in, unfortunately, the person from HMRC took unwell just prior to the call, so he's not able to join us today, but they have committed to answering the questions. And we do have some questions in our Q&A already, which we'll take and send to them. But there's maybe one or two here, Gordon, if you don't mind, given the fact that you've been all over this for the last couple of years. We maybe have a chance to ask yourself about. In terms of...
Could I just make one point as well? I have been speaking to a number of suppliers, fuel suppliers in Northern Ireland, and I'm quite friendly with Terence Kennedy at WR Kennedy, and Terence me and him have been speaking about it. It's one of the things that the HMRC and Treasury did say when they were developing the guidance, etc., that they were going to take very much a pragmatic approach with the end user. They will focus a lot of their compliance activity and enforcement activity on the suppliers in terms of knowing how much red diesel they are purchasing and then selling on to end users. And you know, they have told us that they'll adopt a very pragmatic approach with going out to sites, particularly around the April, May, June time, and like they do expect that there will be traces of red diesel. But if they're going out in October, November time later on this year, and they're still finding those traces, there'll be certainly questions asked. But I suppose the main thrust of their compliance will be with fuel suppliers.
And that kind of answers Damien Morgan's question, which is about his understanding that red diesel was basically going to be done away with completely from the 1st of April. Because as you say, it's basically white diesel with a dye applied to identify the fuel that should get the rebate. So that pragmatic approach would be very welcome. And if it started with the main suppliers before they got around to an individual business level, then that would be very much welcome. There's a question here from Michael Bambrick around biofuels and HVOs. So we're being asked to move to, on the face of it, we're being asked to move to more sustainable, more environmentally friendly fuels. But are you aware of any conversations in Treasury around potentially tax incentivizing those biofuels and HVOs by removing those or by applying a rebate to those fuels in order to move people away from red diesel?
Certainly we haven't asked it, but we were on, Mark Spence and Gavin McGuire and I were on a call yesterday with the Civil Engineering Contractors Association yesterday, and it's certainly one of the questions that they're asking. I don't think that there are any answers yet, but I go back to my point. You know, the Treasury have budgeted, and I think it's an estimate of about $2 billion a year that they'll get out of this. So I would think they'll be reluctant to give any further incentive in the short term.
And Gordon, there's a number of questions about specific industry uses, whether those are in terms of refrigeration units in vehicles, how far the forestry exemption applies, whether that goes down into the full forestry ecosystem, which includes the sawmill, obviously. But in your conversations with HMRC and Treasury, how likely are they to take a pragmatic approach to those exemptions that they've applied, right?
It's a good question, Stephen. I'll be honest with you, I couldn't really answer that. But I see a question there from Billy Dugan. Will red diesel no longer be permitted to be used in refrigeration units fitted to vehicles or trailers? That's correct. And I know our good colleague, good friend and colleague, Seamus Lenahey from Logistics NI, it was one of the issues that they raised with Treasury.
Gordon, the rest of the questions are largely technical related or very specific industry or business related. Connor's taken a copy of all of those. And what we'll do is we'll send those questions off specifically to the people responsible in HMRC and ask them for a response to those. If anyone hasn't had the chance to ask a question at this stage, feel free to either email me directly, which is stephen.kelly@manufacturingni.org, stephen.kelly@manufacturingni.org, or those people that are on the call from the quarrying or minerals or wider construction industry. I'm sure you've got Gordon's details and you can send it to Gordon. So what we'll do is we'll collect all those questions together. We'll send those off to HMRC and ask for a response. There's some really useful ideas already come in there in terms of support for other fuels, in terms of encouraging people to move across, and we'll ask that those are considered as part of the conversations that we as industry bodies will have with government on your behalf. I'd like to thank Gordon for stepping in at the last minute. Otherwise, this would have been a very short webinar of no more than about 12 minutes. In the absence of colleagues from HMRC, Gordon, we really appreciate it. Really appreciate the work that you've been doing on behalf of your industry and all users of this fuel. Feel free to ask any more of those questions. We'll share this presentation and we'll share the recording in our e-sign tomorrow. But if you do have anything specific about your business, feel free to send them through to either myself or Gordon, and we'll make every effort to ensure we get you the answers you need. Thanks very much, everyone. Connor, did you get those questions okay?